everybody. Thank you very much for being here at University for the Creative Arts, albeit virtually, for the inaugural Professorial Lecture of Professor Birgitta Hosea. I'm really delighted to welcome you all to this event this evening. I'm going to make a very brief introduction and then I'm going to hand over to Birgitta for her lecture, which I think will last about 45 or 50 minutes at the most, but there will be plenty of time for discussion and debate afterwards. If anybody has any burning issues or questions as Birgitta is talking, please feel free to put those in the chat and I'll be keeping an eye on those. We won't interrupt the lecture itself with any questions, but we can pluck them out of the chat afterwards to get us going with discussion. So please put those questions in or save them till afterwards. Professor Hosea was educated at the University of Glasgow, the Cass School of Art at London Metropolitan University, and for her PhD research at Central St Martin's University of the Arts, London. She worked in industry as an animator and presentation artist for many years, and her academic career has been developed at UAL, the Royal College of Art, and here at UCA, where Birgitta joined us in 2018 as a reader in Moving Image and as director of the Animation Research Centre. Birgitta is a very industrious and extremely productive researcher, as I know only too well from having worked with her for the past several years. She is an artist in the field of time-based media, whose research encompasses artworks, exhibitions, events, and written outputs that both underpin and reflect upon her practice. Recent notable outputs include her co-authored book, Performance Drawing, New Practices Since 1945, from 2020, her major exhibition Erasure at the Hanmi Gallery in Seoul, South Korea, her performance work Dash, and chapters entitled On Paracinema and the Dematerialization of Animation, Mindful Animation for Learning Awareness, and Made by Hand in the collection The Crafty Animator, Handmade Craft-Based Animation and Cultural Value. And all of those research outputs are just in the last few years, the last 2 or 3 years, which shows you just how productive Birgitta is. She's at the forefront of her field and she leads debates. She productively coins new terminology and she sets agendas within her field. And this includes at its intersections with other disciplines. And I think there's evidence of that in all of those outputs that I have just listed, but Birgitta will talk more about this throughout her lecture. She's also a tireless organiser of events, and I think she sees the fostering of dialogue between researchers through events as part of her practice. So I really hope that there will be plenty of dialogue following the lecture today in the spirit of Birgitta's practice as a facilitator of dialogue and discussion. Birgitta has been a driving force behind the Ecstatic Truth series of research events, for instance, which have taken place across, I think if I've counted correctly, 5 different institutions and 3 countries in the past several years. And here at UCA, she has organised conferences, Cartoon Animation, Satire and Subversion, and Experimental and Expanded Animation. And in recent years, she has made regular contributions to Ars Electronica, the Festival of Digital and New Media Art Practice in Linz in Austria, where she's a very regular contributor and participant in a variety of different formats. I'm delighted and excited to present Professor Birgitta Hosea to you for this, her inaugural public lecture as Professor of Moving Image here at University for the Creative Arts. Her lecture is titled Expanding Animation and Other Queer Goings On. Welcome, Birgitta, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I'm just going to share my screen now. And I just wanted to say thank you to Abby, Amir, Liz, Sean, Tracy, everyone else in the research office, and of course Victoria as well, for all the support that you've given me and for putting this event on tonight. This lecture is being recorded and it will be put on YouTube afterwards. So, who am I? Why am I a professor? I've written a lot of stuff. Here's some of it, but today I'm going to focus on my practice because that's at the center of everything I do. I can't show everything I've done because there's simply not enough time, so I'll show a selection. I'll show some films, but due to the nature of this platform I'm using, I think there may be some dropped frames, so apologies if the playback is not 100% when I show films. So I've done a lot of things, but I want to start out by saying that I am not that special. No one is that special. We all share the same air and are all products of our time, interconnected with the communities that we're part of, assemblages of ideas and influences that surround us. In this, my inaugural professorial lecture, I want to acknowledge the ideas and influences and community that my work draws upon. Before I start on that, I just wanted to say that I normally like to dwell in the present moment rather than in the past, and that I usually feel much more comfortable talking about ideas rather than about myself. But given the nature of an inaugural professorial lecture, I thought I'd give some biographical details as it does have relevance to the themes of the lecture. Now, anyone who does computer animation knows that the direction an object faces and where its center of gravity lies affects how it moves through space and the path of its motions. We animators also know that there are three ways of looking at where the central axis of three-dimensional space is. This could be the local axis, in which the object itself contains the center of movement. Or this could be the world axis. In other words, the center of movement is within the virtual world rather than the individual object. Third option, the center of movement or the anchor point could be at the center of the user's screen, the window onto that virtual world shown according to the angle that the viewer looks at it. So we've got three different options. Movement is orientated around the individual object, movement is orientated around the center of the world, or movement is orientated around the way that the viewer sees it. Sarah Ahmed applies this idea of orientation more broadly to human experience. She says we are all orientated. The way we position ourselves towards the world affects the paths we choose to take in life and the deviations we make along the way. We choose to face towards certain directions and avoid others. To be incorrectly orientated is to be out of place, not to know your place, or not to toe the line, to be a deviant. She says orientations shape not only how we inhabit space, but how we apprehend this world of shared inhabitants, as well as who or what we direct our attention and energy towards. Ahmed also argues that space itself is not neutral. Depending on how we are orientated, doors might be open for us, we might be invited in, or on the other hand, we may slam into a brick wall. She says, depending on which way one turns, different worlds might even come into view. The way in which I am orientated has affected the choices I have made. Being queer and being female comes through in all my work in some way. Although I acknowledge that as a white person and someone who is cisgendered, I've had access to a lot of privilege. Being born female and queer, my life and my work have been marked by a need to struggle against the forces of sexism and homophobia. Not as a choice, not as a lifestyle, not for fun, but just to exist, just to be me, just to be my authentic self. As I came up with the title for this presentation, Expanding Animation and Other Queer Goings-On, I straight away realised that I'd subconsciously plagiarised the title of my friend Dorothea Smart's book. But then I decided to keep this and to acknowledge it because actually it's an example of how we're all influenced and inspired by our friendship groups. I did tell her, and she doesn't mind. Thank you, Dorothea. I also want to thank all the other amazing friends I have who've supported me through thick and thin, good times and bad. One of the things I've really learned from the coronavirus situation is just how precious friends are and how much I appreciate them. So now, onto my story. I was born in Edinburgh of a Swedish artist mother and a Scottish engineer father. And hello to both of you if you've managed to log in. Most of my childhood was spent in Grays in Essex, with a little bit in Edinburgh, a little bit in East Anglia, a little bit in Kent. My teenage years was spent in this Scottish seaside town that is very pretty, but I longed to leave. I wanted to escape and I wanted to live in a city. My first job was in a chip shop there, aged 14. I was very shy. I was picked on a bit at school for having an English accent and being half foreign. But everything changed when I discovered punk rock. After winning an award in a national fashion design competition at school, I decided to go to Glasgow University to study drama and film studies. I acted in a number of plays, directed a couple, and set up a women's theatre co-op. Here's me and my friends, we were actually still teenagers, in an occult play based on the teachings of Aleister Crowley. We were very young. I was also in an all-girl punk band. We had no money, but as part of the general post-punk ethos, we had a great sense of bravado and do-it-yourself. Let's just do this thing. We can set up a band. Let's do it. Our big claim to fame was that we supported the Shaman once, before they got well known, obviously. But despite all of this, I decided I absolutely did not want to be a performer. I didn't want to be an object that someone else directed, and what I was really interested in was the visual aspect of performance. So I went to study theatre design at postgraduate at Glasgow School of Art, and then worked as a prop maker, did soft sculpture, made costumes and scale models, designed plays and short films, assisted designers on West End shows, TV series. In particular, I did a lot of work for Julian Clary. I also assisted on feature films, including Zeffirelli's Hamlet and Ken Russell's Lair of the White Worm. It was all very camp. Everything I did at this period in my life was really camp. By this time, I'd moved to London. There was no work in Scotland, and London had other attractions. As a queer woman, being in London felt much more free than being in Scotland. I lived for several years in women-only separatist squats. I joined Brixton Artists Collective. My work got some media attention with an exhibition I had called Hot Pussy, and I was given the harmless branding of lipstick lesbian, which was in vogue at the time. But it was annoying to one who wanted to smash the patriarchy. The work got a lot of attention and made the news of the world, but it wasn't how I wanted to be portrayed. I felt fetishized and trivialized. I received a number of abusive, homophobic phone calls at my studio. My best friend John Graham, who I shared the studio with, also had a solo exhibition at the same time in the same gallery called God is Queer. We did a lot of partying, we had a lot of fun, but there was a downside. A virus was haunting my queer community. Many people became infected, including John, and he finally died from AIDS. The level of homophobic abuse and multiple bereavements that we experienced during these years is hard to have to remember, and I always have to hold back tears when I talk about this. This is a float John and I designed and made for the Notting Hill Carnival, where we gave out free condoms and promoted safe sex. Why this is particularly relevant to my story today is that it was as a volunteer for the Terence Higgins Trust that I first learned how to work with computers. In the office, they gave me a training on WordStar. Word hadn't even been invented yet. Losing my best friend to AIDS, I was preoccupied with the idea of viruses, of the way that ideas spread like psychological viruses. This is an installation and performance I did at Cable Street Studios and the Globe Centre. My friend Sandra also took part. We stamped the hands of all participants with a stamp saying infected or not infected at random. Some of the viruses I had made were sharp, and you had to walk around them to avoid getting cut. I then went on to do a foundation course in computing and fine art, followed by an MA in computer animation. I did 3 different part-time jobs to support my studies. My graduation film continued to experiment with this theme of the virus and how prejudice spreads like an epidemic. My friend Sandra's also in the film. This is very old work and I feel quite critical of it these days, but it was student work, so please watch it with some forgiveness. I'm going to show it now. Again, apologies for any drop frames, and Victoria, please verbally indicate if the sound doesn't work. It is initially silent, so.
Quand on peut faire de la politique. La relation, c'est vraiment pas une spécialité.
So in our current pandemic of COVID-19, this old work I did in the 1990s seems to have a resonance again. Last year, I was invited to create a live performance in response to the pandemic for the Trojan Donkey. This was a performance art event curated by the artist Armin Gulji and some of his colleagues. So I dug out the old rubber stamps that Sandra and I had used in my virus performance and created a drawing with different tools, live on camera, that aimed to visualize COVID-19's routes of transmission from person to person. This was done outside my basement in an enclosed area that looks like a prison cell. I don't have a video of it, but it's on the Trojan Donkey Facebook page. If anyone knows how to download an archived Facebook Live video, please let me know later, because I can't work out how to do it. So, back to my story. After finishing my MA, an ex-girlfriend got me a job at Adobe, and I ended up working for them for 13 years as a freelancer, demonstrating software in big trade shows, training corporate clients in video, animation, and digital imaging, and running a series of monthly events called Adobe Inspired Media for animators, filmmakers, and designers. Around this time, I'd also started working part-time for Central St. Martin's as course director of MA Character Animation. Here's me and Steve Roberts with the books we'd written in Catton Street around 2006. Around this time, I spent years obsessively learning software in each upgrade, didn't do many creative projects. But then I started to get bored with how things are made and decided to focus on the ideas behind the work. I wanted to bring together my previous experience in performance and design for performance and bring it together with my new passion for computer animation. At Central St. Martin's, I embarked on a PhD in animation as performance, studying at Drama Centre London under the supervision of Professor Vladimir Miradan, with external supervision from Professors Paul Wells and Paul Sermon. I was also still working as a freelancer for Adobe and also running the MA in character animation at the same time as doing my PhD. And as I said before, in my PhD, I wanted to bring together all these different worlds that I'd worked in. I wanted to figure out what the connections between them were and to generate some new practice at the intersections. The argument that I make in my research is that animation is a form of performance. I started out by looking at what is animation, because I realized that the more I looked into it, the more I actually didn't understand what it was anymore. I wanted to uncover whether animation could be seen as a form of performance, which gave me 3 areas to focus on in detail. So the first one is the animator a performer? The second area was, could animation be live? And the third one was, is it the viewer who performs the character into being? So this was practice-based research, in other words, investigation through doing, making art experiments to see what would happen and create new knowledge. While I was doing this, I didn't actually tell my students at Central St. Martin's what I was doing, because I thought they'd think I was nuts. And I'm actually sure that my colleagues in the animation department thought I was nuts. As part of the research, I was also very interested in performance theory, and particularly Judith Butler's work on performativity. In this book, Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, Judith Butler argues that gender is not fixed at birth, but decided according to the norms of the society in which we live. It's a role we play. Indeed, our identity is so fragile that we need to continually perform this role again and again to remind ourselves of who we are, who we choose to be, whether we play by the rules of society or whether we break them. A breakthrough project for me was Dog Betty. I was fascinated by the character of Betty Boop, hating her and yet somehow intrigued by her as well. So I based this paper character on an early version of the character design where she is a poodle, so hence Dog Betty, because Betty Boop came from a dog. In this project, I was interested in the idea that the animator is a performer. I wanted to get inside the paper skin of a cartoon character and to take her out of the screen and onto the streets of London. I wanted to explore the idea of feminine masquerade and just how subversive it might be. As a reaction to the preconception that animation is just for children, the film titles reference adult themes such as drug taking, cottaging in the park, and Joe Orton and Kenneth Halliwell's subversive act of cutting up library books. The short films were documented by friends. They're quite rough and ready. I'll show one now. So that was Dog Betty. As I said, I was interested in animation as a concept and how women are animated by conventional ideas about how a woman should behave. This next short film is a pastiche of the Hollywood film Sunset Boulevard from 1950. I used After Effects to animate photographs of this doll to explore the idea of Hollywood actresses and how their behavior might animate a character. The doll animation lip syncs to a sample to a few lines of dialogue from the iconic film, in which Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond is reflecting on the act of performing for the camera. I'll show that now.
Right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people up there in the dark.
Moving on from this, became sort of getting deeper into the idea of what performance might be. I wanted to experiment with multiple levels of performance taking place all at the same time. Animated performance, a live presence, pre-recorded performance, and the performer herself being animated by a recording. Out There in the Dark, which are performed multiple times between 2008 2010, was conceived as a living sculpture in which I'm possessed by the ghost of a character from a film. I'm seated on a chair with wheels, my head is hooded by a paper bag, and my face is replaced with the projection of the animated doll, clips from that film I just showed. This projection is tightly integrated with the motion of my face because the projector is handheld and operated like a follow spot by someone who would help me. A video camera relays a live feed which is projected onto the back wall with a small delay. The snippet of dialogue is deconstructed, cut into small fragments and repeated in order to create a rhythmic soundtrack. At some points, the word nothing is slowed down to become a mournful moan. No other sounds are used beyond the dialogue from the film. So I'm going to show you now a 3-minute film, which is a combination of little bits of animation, but mainly documentation of the first performance at the Letherby Gallery in 2008.
else. Nothing, nothing, there's nothing else. Nothing, nothing, there's nothing else. Cameras, 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 nothing else. Cameras, 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 there in the dark. Cameras, 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 cameras. There's nothing else. Just us. And the camera. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people up there in the dark. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people up there in the dark. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people up there in the dark. 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 Down there in the dark. Up there in the dark. Up there in the dark. Wonderful up there in the dark. 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 People there in the dark. Up 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 there in the dark.
So that's Out There in the Dark. I did a couple of, I did lots of different versions of this in different types of venues, but the last few times I've done it has been in a peep show. And this is just my favourite way of showing it, and I won't show it any other way in the future. Doing it in a peep show, the audience peeps in as if they're going to see something forbidden or something smutty, but actually what they see is a nightmare. And this is what you saw through the peephole at the Mix 23 Queer Experimental Film Festival in New York. This next project, Medium, is a site-specific piece of work that I performed with projections of animation in various old churches and a former workhouse in London. It combines live performance, projections of pre-recorded animation and video, samples of audio from old films, and live digital drawing and automatic writing. Again, it's inspired by Judith Butler's ideas about performing identity. I wanted to experiment with ideas of channeling spirits, to explore the state of being conditioned by social conventions from the media that surrounds us. The research for this project began with an investigation into the origins of photographic manipulation in Victorian stage magic and spiritualism. I was fascinated by spirit photography and Victorian mediumistic seances and the multiple meanings of media, medium, mediation. So, what is a medium? A medium is an in-between state, a means by which a message is transmitted. This could take the form of film or radio, but it could also be a person through whom the spirits speak. And the implication here is that spirit mediums, who are mainly women, were passing on messages that they were not in control of, like a secretary, that they were not capable of having messages of their own. Look at the woman in Man Ray's famous photograph here from 1924. She's typing while the clever men talk. She has no ideas of her own. She just passes on theirs. I, however, believe these spirit mediums to be artists. Through telekinetic powers, they made objects move of their own accord and were able to manifest mysterious characters and swirling clouds of different textures. In many ways, these spirit mediums are like stop-motion animators, creating performances with objects. My medium is a living picture that is performed, that moves and can be heard. My medium is channeling dead people from old films. Although the projected digital characters are pre-recorded, the automatic writing and drawing that she projects while in a mock trance state are improvised and changed spontaneously. This was done during each performance using a Wacom tablet and Arduino-powered tag tool to create drawings of light that were projected over the animations in the background. I was interested in processes where the animator is not in conscious control of her body and is herself animated by outside forces. My medium channels signals from radio, from films, from the media that surrounds her. The spirit voices she channels are from old films in which the world of the living touches the world of the dead. You hear this in the audio track that uses samples of dialogue from these films. And before I show a clip, I just want to thank Anna Peach for her support in helping me set this and other installations up, and also to Sarah Sparks for her curation and encouragement. I'm just going to show excerpts from this. Going to fast forward a bit because we don't have time to see all of the 10 minutes. Let's go to about here.
I cannot understand you. I cannot understand you. I cannot understand you. I cannot understand you. You wouldn't think she'd been gone so long, would you? You wouldn't think she'd been gone so long, would you? I fancy I hear her just behind me. You wouldn't think she'd been gone so long, would you? Are you receiving me? You wouldn't think she'd been gone so long, would you? Are you receiving? Are you receiving me? I fancy I hear her just behind me. Are you receiving me? Repeat. Are you receiving me? Are you receiving me? Repeat. Are you receiving me? Sometimes. 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 When I walk along the corridor, I fancy I hear her just behind me. Are you receiving me? Repeat. Are you receiving me? I fancy I hear her just behind me. Got a message. I fancy I hear her just behind me. Got your message. Received your message. We can hear you. I fancy I hear her.
Going to stop that there because I just can't show you the whole of that clip. We don't have enough time. And just wanted to say, absolutely thrilled that Sarah Sparks did a painting of this work as part of her series of 101 paintings in which she's looking back at her curation of ghost projects over the last 13 years. So the site was very important in this work. All the sites I did it in were very kind of resonant with atmosphere. And this next piece was also created for a site-specific location. I was asked to make a piece of work to celebrate the 100th year anniversary of Alan Turing. The exhibition featured artworks that were inspired by codes and code breaking. For those of you who don't know, Alan Turing was a British mathematical genius. During the Second World War, he worked for the British government to break the codes that Germans used through their famous Enigma machine, and his pioneering work led to the development of the first computers. The Centre for Code Breaking in Britain during the Second World War was in Bletchley Park. The machines they used had dials and could do extremely complex calculations. When Alan Turing finally cracked the Enigma code, the British could understand all the German secret messages and know about their plans. It was calculated that by him doing this, the Second World War ended at least 2 years sooner than it could have. So he was really a great hero. I was just so honoured to show my work in the very room where Alan Turing cracked the Enigma code. But the problem was that Alan Turing was queer. He was imprisoned for being a homosexual and made to take female hormones. He killed himself by eating a poisoned apple, but some people think he was killed by the Secret Service. Allegedly, that's why the Apple logo has a bite taken out of it in memory of him. Because of this story, I asked my friend Mary Claire Foer to write a poem in which the word Turing is slowly transformed into the word apple, and I animated this. The name of the film, Turple, comes from one word turning into the other. The animation in the background is made of code, and the sound is generated by code from the colour that's used in the film. So play that now. So that's only one of a number of collaborative projects that I've done with Mary Claire Foer. We've also both worked together extensively with Carolee McCall and Jane Grisewood, since we all studied together on our PhDs at UAL. I'm not going to talk about our collaborative practice today because there's not enough time, and I'm going to be doing a lecture about collaborative drawing for the Film, Media and Performing Arts doctoral seminars in June. But our artistic collaborations have resulted in us writing this book together that was published last year, and it's in UCA's library. We also have an archive of our work on the Drawn Together blog, and you can follow us on Instagram for updates about what we're doing. My work with this group of artists has made me much less interested in performances in which I create characters, and to focus more on drawing and the performance of mark making. The next project started with a small object that was very personal to me. Since it took place in a former convent, my starting point for the Athena Asilo residency was my deceased grandmother's broken rosary and a desire to explore the Catholic heritage on my mother's side of the family. Normally, I work on a computer and use projections, as you've seen, but I left these familiar tools at home in order to challenge myself and get back to working with ink, paint, charcoal, drawing materials that I'd not used for years. I drew the broken rosary again and again and again with different materials, which made me think a lot about my grandmother who'd recently died, and also my other grandmother who died over 20 years previously. I thought a lot about the invisible work that mothers do to support their families. Endless domestic labour that leaves no trace, sacrifices made and taken for granted. The 12th drawing in the series was produced as the result of a performance in which I scrubbed and scrubbed until I made holes in a series of black pieces of paper while doing the rosary. One act of scrubbing on a piece of paper for each bead. The holes in the paper that resulted looked like the highlights shining on the rosary beads. The line of pieces of paper left behind looked like a film strip, a record of the time taken to scrub each one. This demonstrates the idea that, like a film strip, a rosary is also a device to record actions over time, the prayers that are supposed to be said for each bead. In the final exhibition, I didn't show any of the other drawings that I'd done. I only showed these pieces of paper because this seemed like the most important thing that I'd learned. I showed the work in progress to a couple of galleries and got invited to do the performance at an exhibition of experimental animation in China, alongside a number of other works on paper that I'd done. I was then invited to perform this work at a big exhibition of 100 feminist artists in London. I continued to work with the idea of capturing traces of domestic labour through performative mark making, and made a whole series of works on paper and animated installations for this solo exhibition in 2018, but unfortunately I don't have time to show them all today. It included a 3-minute film called Erasure, which the exhibition's named after. I drew upon all the ideas I'd gone through in the making of all the different research drawings, and I was also helped by my composer, Jose Macabre, who added a lot of richness in the details of the sound. This is the short statement that I wrote about the film. Repetitive actions and the textures of ink, bleach, and other cleaning products are used to reanimate the labour of domestic work performed by many generations of women, yet invisible and forgotten. I'll now show you the film. So that was Erasure. This next project was a very different way to use drawing. Rather than an individual performance, this was a group action, a communal ritual in which people come together to reclaim the night, to take control of frightening spaces and tell a different story. It was commissioned by Inspiral London, a collaborative artist project led by Charlie Fox of Counter Productions. The project is based on a 300-mile route in the shape of a spiral, drawn around the map of London and divided into 36 different walks. For Night Walking North Kent Festival, we created a series of artworks along the end of the walking trail in Gravesend. The route involved going past light industrial areas that are desolate and deserted at night, ending up in a tunnel through a disused chalk pit at Ebbsfleet International Station. It was 11:30 at night and completely dark by the time we got there. Everyone was given 2 laser pens, and together we created a live performance of animation. I shouted instruction as to what colours and types of marks everyone should make. I divided people into groups and got each to draw different kinds of marks with different colours, and also to sing with me while they did this. The instructions I gave were loosely based on a chance-based score made by walking on sheets of musical paper using the 3 colours of the lasers. Since the work was going to take place when walking was part of the creation method for the visual music score. Using lasers, this was a communal participatory drawing performance directed by me that becomes a live animation, a group ritual that changes the story of a dark, frightening place into a space of light, colour and wonder. It's very hard to photograph, but I have this clip that my friend Anne Robinson took on her phone. So I'm just going to play a little snippet of it just to give you a sense of the audio. So that's enough of that. It's just to give you a sense of the sound. So finally, what I'm working on right now is a project for the Asifa Kyle Gallery in Vienna's Museum Quarter. It's a small gallery and an indoor walkway with 2 different windows. The walkway leads to the main square in Vienna for national museums and galleries. The project continues exploring the theme of the peep show that I played with in my work of Out There in the Dark. It was supposed to open last April, but because of COVID, it's been postponed until November of this year now. This is a scale model of the gallery that shows how I want to turn the whole space into a peep show. I'm going to create giant paper structures similar to my Rosary 12 drawings you saw earlier, which will form peepholes through which you'll see abstract animation that hints at the interior of the human body. It aims to capture lockdown introversion, in which our human emotions, desires, and fragility are put under the microscope. As part of the research, I've done hundreds of drawings. I've turned to what I think of as slow animation, drawing each frame by hand with oil pastels. Building on extensive work I've previously done in drawing as a form of meditation, lockdown has changed my experience of animating. It's no longer something I want to get done quickly on a computer. I wanted to hold on to each frame that I draw, holding on to the experience of touch denied elsewhere, holding on to the making of the film. For someone who usually animates with computers, it feels insane that each frame in the sequence can take up to 30 minutes or more to draw. And I'm reminded of Laura Mulvey's concept of a pensive frame in her book 24 Frames a Second, and the idea of a frame that you want to stop and keep hold of. I'm still working on the project, so I can only show you a short clip of work in progress, and it doesn't have any sound yet. Okay, so in conclusion, I've shown works that combine performance with animation and video and drawing, sometimes live, sometimes recorded, sometimes flat, sometimes spatial, but always in dialogue with ideas about time, motion, and animation. I like to think of my post-medium approach to practice as queer, refusing to accept predefined boundaries, moving between labels. I'm going to leave with some last words from filmmaker Barbara Hammer. She's talking about abstract cinema and says, "You allow the viewer to enter in and make their own film, or experience in a way that it isn't predetermined. We are living in an age where we do not want predetermined sexuality, genders, political diagrams, fixed notions of reality. We're living in a new virtual age where things are fluid and emerging. To be adaptive to that, we also need to be a part of that, not separate from it." She's talking about abstract cinema, but I like to think her words could also apply to any non-narrative experimental work, such as I've been doing. So finally, if you're interested at expanding ways of thinking about and practicing animation, please check out the Animation Research Centre webpage. We're open to PhD proposals, visiting scholars, and all kinds of different collaborations. You can contact me at just simply my name with a dot in the middle at UCA, etc. Or if you want to find out more about my personal work, you can follow me on Instagram. I keep a blog at extandedanimation.net. And finally, I have a website which archives most of my project, birgittahosea.co.uk. So I'm going to draw to a close now, and thank you all very much for listening, and Victoria will be fielding the questions.